finish up today. I know I told you we were going to start generosity today. I lied, but I did tell you that there was more I wanted to say about solitude. But as I went through this week, I thought we need to kind of pause. I do want to talk about solitude and kind of wrap up that, and then we will start generosity next Sunday, Lord willing. But today, I want to talk about solitude and then talk about a book that I've read that helps us build habits in our lives. Because I don't want us to just talk about all these disciplines, but not put them into practice. That's kind of what the whole structure of how we worship and gather together is based around, is talking about these, then putting them into practice. So I want to give you some practical tips today on how to do that as we wrap up this idea of solitude and move into generosity. Because we've talked about several disciplines up to this point, and I don't want to just keep feeding you different disciplines without you working in your life to form a rule of life and form a rhythm of life with these disciplines in them. So that's kind of how today's going to go down, and we'll talk about a book here in just a minute that maybe you've read. If you haven't read it, I would highly encourage you to read it. Before we do that, let's start with prayer and get our minds right for the day. Let's pray together. Father, we come before you humbled and in awe and just amazed at you and your love for us. Father, just to be able to spend time with you, to be near you, to draw near to you in your throne room is amazing. Thank you for living and abiding in us and for loving us and for all the blessings in our lives and all the people in our lives. And today, as we gather together once again as a church family, as brothers and sisters, help us to reflect Christ. Help us to pursue truth, to pursue grace, to pursue love, and allow your Spirit to transform us individually and as a whole to be more like you. Father, thank you for loving us. Thank you for blessing us. Guide our thoughts and our minds today and our conversation as we look for ways to better each other, to equip each other for the work of ministry and for the work of bringing heaven to earth. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your Spirit. Thank you for your Son. It's in his name we pray. Amen. Okay, this one's dead. More masculine. Anyways, thank you, Martin. All right, guys. Today we are going to talk about, let me reconnect my deal here. We might have problems with this. Today we're going to finish up talking about solitude and just a rule of life in general. Now, a rule of life it's really a set of practices or rhythms that you move through, specifically religious practices, spiritual practices, all these things we've been talking about. And a rule of life is not about, it's not about being rigid, but about change. It's not about a law that you have to practice in order to earn grace or find merit in God. It's about transformation and allowing the Spirit to transform you. And that's what we're pursuing together as a body. Living by the spiritual practices set out in a rule opens us up to the transformative work of God and the transformative work of the Spirit. It's preparing our minds and our hearts and our lives. It's preparing the soil for the Spirit to work in your life, right? And so having a rule of life and forming a rule of life is not something that earns you salvation or anything like that. It's something you want to do, you should want to do, to know God more and to be more like Christ. And it enables us and it opens up the unhealthy practices and the unhealthy things that we have, the unhealthy behaviors that we have in our lives, and it makes the necessary adaptations in our living to address those. Now, everybody's rule of life is not going to look the same, right? Mine is not going to look like yours. One, because we may have different personalities. I'm an introvert, you may be an extrovert. We've talked about this. I may be creative, you may be more left-brained. You may be right brain, left brain, whatever it may be. You may not have kids. I have kids. Right? So we're at different stages in life as well. So everybody's rule of life is going to be different. But a rule of life should be holistic. It should include aspects of living in the wider world, making time for relationships. It should include your physical and emotional well-being as well as spiritual matters like prayer, Bible study, fellowship, all these different things. A rule of life should be the practices and the guide and the rule of your life that leads you closer to each other and closer to Christ. And again, depending on personality type or household circumstances, you figure out what your rule of life looks like. And so today we're going to change gears a little bit and try and talk about how to do that. Let me see if I can get this to work real quick. Okay, there we go. All right, so when thinking about how to form new habits and how to form a rule of life, one of the things that you should incorporate in your life, obviously, is the last discipline that we've been talking about, and that is solitude. Finding a rhythm or a practice or a place in your life for solitude, even if it's just 5 minutes in the morning when you wake up or before you go to bed. If the morning times don't work for you because they're chaotic, which they will be here starting this week, they're going to be really chaotic. If those don't work for you, find a time, maybe in the middle of the day, where you can spend 5 minutes or 5 minutes before bed, where you find a rhythm, a practice of solitude. Maybe you spend a larger chunk of time in quiet on your Sabbath, on your day of rest, whenever you take a Sabbath. Or maybe your rule of life can't have a daily rhythm of solitude. Maybe it needs to be a monthly rhythm of solitude for you. Maybe you find a place of retreat where you go monthly. This is all about you building your rule of life and you building your times for solitude and all the other disciplines that we've talked about. But it's also about you're beginning to, I don't know if this is a word, denoise all of your life, right? You know what I mean by denoise? All the noise that we've talked about, one of the first things you learn in solitude is to really spend time with God and to just sit with God and to just listen. Just be with Him and to notice His discerning and His direction in your life. And one of the first things you notice is how much noise there is in your life when you're not in solitude. And even just mental noise. When you're on your phone, when you're on any sort of screen, just all the noise in your life fades away. The Apostle Paul said to the Thessalonians, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. I love that verse. I've done a whole series on that verse before. He goes on to say, work with your hands, provide for yourself. But make it your ambition, he tells these Christians in Thessalonica, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. It's like, oh, thank you, Paul. What a beautiful invitation to just slow down and to lead a life that is not so full of noise. Most of us live in a noisy life, in a noisy world. We go, go, go. We never stop. But many people, they find that as they follow Jesus over time and as they begin to listen less to the noise, maybe that's podcast, TV, music, whatever it is, that stuff isn't bad per se. I find a lot of value in a lot of those things. But it's a world that's trying to distract itself, and it's a person trying to distract themselves from the emptiness within and from the things that they need to face within. But as you follow Jesus more over time, and as you structure your rule of life, and as you spend more time in solitude, you will likely find that as you follow Jesus, you crave more quiet time. Have you found this to be true? The more time you spend in solitude, the more you crave that time in solitude, because the more you crave God and the less you crave noise. Has this been true for you in your practice of solitude so far? Do you find yourself wanting to go to your place or your time of solitude more? Raise your hand if that's a yes. Okay, why? Yes.
Because it recharges you for when you have to go forward again. It's God is here and you talk to him and
Yeah.
I'm not saying it right, but it recharges you.
Right, it did so for Jesus. It was the place where Jesus found strength. It's also the place where we find strength. Anybody else? Why do you find yourself longing for these moments of solitude in your rule of life? Perspective, how so, Terry? Yes, absolutely. It helps you remember what you were called to. We talked about this. Remember your identity and what you were called to, right? This is what God is reminding you of what you should be about when maybe you were off track and now your perspective is right. Anybody else chat?
In most cases, with all these things we've talked about in the last couple of months, it keeps me wanting to come back because I start noticing things are happening in my life.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? Like he's either talking to me or he's guiding me in some situations or things happen in a good way and you start noticing these things. So it kind of makes you're not doing it for that reason, but it helps you kind of know that, okay, I need him to talk back on stuff that helps me keep going.
Maybe you are paying more attention to him than you were before.
He's been talking the whole time, now I can hear him.
God is working in our lives, but maybe we don't recognize it, and maybe we do get off track until we pay attention to his discernment, to his voice, to his guiding and leading when we spend time in solitude. And so why would you not want to go back? Let me remind you of what Ruth Haley Barton says in her book, Silence and Solitude. She said, it's an invitation to enter more deeply into the intimacy of relationship with the one who waits just outside the noise and busyness of our lives. Isn't that wonderful? And that's what this is all about. It's you want to be with the one. You want to be with him above all else. And once you start to practice that in your life, you crave it more and more and more. God is waiting for you outside the noise, outside the crowds of people, outside the hurry of life, and outside the distractions of our time. Again, we said this in the very first class. We are the first apprentices of Jesus, trying to apprentice under Jesus in a fully digital age. And we can use that as an excuse, and oftentimes we do, but we have a lot of distractions pulling at our attention, and God is calling us to live in these rhythms just as he did the first century Christians, who had probably just as many distractions, just different distractions. And so that's solitude. We're done with solitude. Anybody want to add anything to the discipline of solitude before we move on? Yeah, Eric.
So I attempted solitude twice this past week.
Okay.
The August 5th was my birthday, so I thought I'd start it out with a little bit of solitude. So I did, and it was wonderful. You know, just sitting there with nothing, didn't bring my phone out where I was,
Yeah.
just read my Bible and just prayed and listened. It was great, but then I had a pretty crappy rest of my day.
Are you blaming me for that?
No, I'm wondering, this is more of a question, I'm wondering when you do these things that are outside of your norm to try and reach out to God, try to be closer to him, does Satan also take notice of these things and attempt to come at you more in order to offset your attempt to get closer to God?
When Jesus withdrew into solitude, who was there? Well, the Spirit drew him into solitude, but who was there attacking him the whole time? Right.
That's a little bit what I experienced. It didn't stop me from doing it again. I did try it again later on in the week, and I didn't have a crappy day. But I noticed that initially that I felt like I was being attacked by Satan after trying to get closer to God.
Remember, we talked about this. C.S. Lewis says that solitude is one of the most powerful things for God, and so that Satan is going to attempt to deter you, and not just Satan, the world, your own personal desires, all of these ungodly forces in a sense. And remember, we talked about how when you want to go into solitude, literally everything is going to fall apart. You're going to get a flat tire. You're going to get a call that you have to go to right then, all these different things. It happens, and if you've noticed, if you pay attention, it happens often. All right, we're going to talk about bad habits here in just a second. Kelly?
I think, back, hundreds, thousands of years ago, whatever, one of the most important things was that you carry fire. When you move from place to place, you have to have fire, to then start your fire, or a way to
Right.
start it.
Don't let the fire go out. Yeah.
Right, and I think, thinking about entering into solitude, we should also think about bringing that solitude into ourselves, and we can carry that with us wherever we are.
I like
Even
that, Kelly.
It's the craziness of life within us, because we have a spirit, we can have that solitude.
Yes.
And then we can share it with others if we want to make that a bigger project. But we don't have to just worry about finding it. We need to also worry about, or think about, not worry, incorporating it into our lives.
Absolutely.
We can always have it.
I love that, and that's a beautiful thought and a wise thought, and it goes along with the truth that God now resides in you, that you don't have to go find God. God is with you, and He's with us as a whole. We are the temple of His Spirit. Therefore, we have direct access to His Spirit 24/7, right? And you can find solitude in the midst of noise, but this practice really is a place. It involves a place and a discipline of quiet. So let's talk about this practically. And we're going to get away from the Bible a little bit here. Don't scold me because of that. I know this is a Bible class, but sometimes we talk about a lot of different things, a lot of different big ideas within the Bible, and then we don't talk about the practical side of those necessarily. So there's a book. How many of you have read this book, Atomic Habits by James Clear? Anybody read this book? Have you seen this book? It's one of the most popular books as far as leadership skills go and different things. Wow, okay, I thought at least one person in here would have read. Okay, Megan, you've read it? Okay. If you haven't read this book, you should have read it. Brandon, you read it? Okay, y'all don't raise your hands very high. You're like, thank you, yes. You should read this book. I don't care what you do professionally. I don't care what stage of life you're in. Wow, what a great book. So this is about small changes that have a big impact, right? And as I'm reading through this, I'm thinking about the spiritual disciplines and how this is so practical for forming our rule of life. Now, there are 3 key lessons from this book, and I want to share those with you, and then I want to share a very practical way to think about how to incorporate all the things we've talked about up to this point into our lives, into our rhythms of life, okay? So, prayer, Sabbath, fasting, and solitude are the ones that we've talked about so far. All right, the first lesson is this in the book. Small habits make a big difference. Now think about this. It's so easy to overestimate the importance of one defining moment and underestimate the value of making small improvements on a daily basis. Small, tiny, atomic habits that you form on a daily basis. James says this in the book. He says, improving by 1% isn't particularly notable. Sometimes it isn't even noticeable, but it can be far more meaningful, especially in the long run. The difference a tiny improvement can make over time is astounding. He says, here's how the math works out. If you can get 1% better each day for 1 year, you'll end up 37 times better by the time you're done. Conversely, if you get 1% worse each day for 1 year, you'll decline nearly down to 0. What starts as a small win or a minor setback accumulates into something much more. He's right, isn't he? You've found this to be true in your life. And we'll read some examples here in just a second, but a tiny change. Man, if I can just spend 5 minutes in solitude, if I can discipline myself to spend 5 minutes in solitude one day, and then maybe I miss the next day, but then I pick it back up again. Over time, that small change, that atomic habit is going to build and build and build, and you're going to see your identity change. You're going to see the rule of life that you want to have become the rule of life that you have. He says it doesn't matter how successful or unsuccessful you are right now. What matters is whether your habits are putting you on the path towards success. Now, obviously, this book is not a spiritual book, a religious book, but it applies just the same. Okay, so focus on getting 1% better every day. Focus on changing and transforming your rule of life in small ways every day. Eric says, hey, I did this for my birthday. I loved it, but then I had the worst day ever. Okay, but you still did it. You still incorporated this practice into your life. Where in your daily life can you find time for solitude? Maybe some of you do it every morning. That's outstanding. But where can you find time to do it if you're not doing it? Small habits make a big difference. There's one, I started this one the other day, and we'll talk about this in a second, but he's talking about cues and things that make you subconsciously do things. And he's talking about how we subconsciously do things all the time without realizing it. You have a rhythm every morning, and you probably do the same things in the same order every morning, and you don't even think about it. It's because one thing reminds you to do another thing. It's a cue, and it reminds you to do the next thing. But he said he started doing 10 push-ups after he would change into his night clothes. Or he'd get home, take off his work clothes, and he'd do 10 push-ups and then get his comfy clothes on. And so I did that the other day, and I was like, okay, so the cue is changing clothes, and then it's kind of like Dwight asking for a mint when Jim rings the bell in the office. Yeah. We train ourselves to think this way without thinking about it. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Okay, so lesson 1, small habits make a big difference. Lesson 2, forget about setting goals. Focus on your system instead. He says goals are about the results you want to achieve. Systems are about the processes that lead to those results. So don't think about, I want to achieve this goal. Think about your whole system, right? This is not a rule of year. This is a rule of life. This is not a New Year's resolution. This is who you want to become in Christ. This is your rule of life. Think about the whole system. He says if you're having trouble changing your habits, the problem isn't you. The problem is your system. Bad habits repeat themselves again and again, not because you don't want to change. Anybody in here not want to change? Right. We all want to do better. We all want to be more like Christ. We all want to live in the rhythms of Christ. He says it's not because you don't want to change, but because you have the wrong system for change. Yeah. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. How cool of a quote is that? Let me repeat that. You do not rise to the level of your goals. So you can set goals all day long. You know how many New Year's resolutions you've broke. Right? I've broken millions. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. You're always going to fall back onto how you operate as a whole. So small changes create an entirely new system, an entirely new rule of life. All right, so forget about setting goals. Focus on your system instead. The third one is, not that yet. Wait, here. I didn't even put it up there. The third one is build identity-based habits. Okay, so the key to building lasting habits, he says, is focusing on creating a new identity first. And when I read this, man, it stuck out to me because think about how much we've talked about Christ and what he was battling once he withdrew into solitude. What is he battling primarily? Who he is. If you are the Son of God, then do this. If you are the Son of God, then do this. And then here, let me give you all that you see so that you can be king, if you truly want to be a king, he's battling not just desires of the physical body, not just lust and food and being filled and feeling some sort of emptiness. He's desiring, or he's battling who he is, what God has just claimed about him. And so forming a new system, forming a rule of life is about building identity-based habits. James Clear says, he says, your current behaviors are simply a reflection of your current identity. What you do now is a mirror image of the type of person that you believe that you are, either consciously or subconsciously. You dress because of your identity in your mind. You dress a certain way because of the person that you believe you are, right? You have different habits throughout the day because of the person that you believe you are. To change your behavior for good, you need to start believing new things about yourself. You need to build identity-based habits. Changing your beliefs isn't as hard as you may think it is. There are 2 steps that James Clear gives. He says, decide the type of person you want to be. That's the first one. 2, prove it to yourself with small wins. Again, atomic habits. So decide who you want to be. I want to be an apprentice of Jesus. I want to follow Jesus. I want to be with him, and I want to be more like him. I want this to be my life. I want this to be my true identity and the identity that I live into. So I'm going to decide that's the person that I am. Whether that's true or not. It is true, but whether it's true or not, I need to decide that's the person I want to be. And then I'm going to prove it to myself by accomplishing small wins. I'm going to change the habits in my everyday life and in my weekly life and in my monthly life so that I start to live into my true identity, which is a child of God. And so what that looks like is when I have a bad habit or something that I don't like, something that's not like Christ, how do I change, how do I shift away from that? How do I incorporate a new habit? Because your identity emerges out of your habits. Several of you in here, you think that you're golfers, right? That's a part of your identity. Like you identify as a golfer. And so you work on it, do you not? You watch videos on it. You try and learn new techniques. So you go out on the golf course, and then all of a sudden you shift, you change things in order to do something better, in order to play into your identity. It's true of all of us. I like to ride mountain bikes, and so I watch videos on how to jump better, how to take a berm faster. And one of the things is you need to lean more. That's terrifying to me on a mountain bike at 20 miles an hour to lean into this. And so when I get to that point and I'm going to hit a berm very quickly, I try and lean more, but then my old habits stand me back up straight, you know. But if I can lean just a little bit more than I did the last time, now I'm living more into that identity. And we were at AT&T the other day, and the guy there, I usually get weird comments like this. The guy's like, hey, you know who you look like? And I'm like, oh, great, here we go again. Like one of the Beatles, Balky, I've gotten them all. Ray Romano, like I've gotten all of these. See, guys, don't laugh. This guy said, Tony Hawk, and I'm like, praise the Lord. Salvation has been brought down. Yeah. Need to publicize it? And I said, that's the best one I've ever gotten. Thank you. And he said, you're kind of dressed like, like a skater. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I'm mountain bike. And he's like, yeah, I can see that. And I was like, cool. And I thought, I dress the way that I identify. We all do it. And so decide the type of person you want to be, and then prove it to yourself with small wins. More than anything in this life, I want to be a follower of Christ. I want to live into the identity that he has given me. How can I adjust? How can I change small habits in my life to form my identity to form my system into being an apprentice, a disciple of Christ. The process of building a habit can be divided into 4 steps, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But I want to give you a few examples of how this identity thing works. Here's what he gives in the book. He says, you want to lose weight? Become the type of person who moves more every day. That's your identity, right? A small win, you buy a pedometer, you walk 50 steps when you get home from work. Tomorrow you'll walk 100 steps, the day after that 150 steps. If you do this 5 days a week and add 50 steps each day, by the end of the year, you'll be walking over 10,000 steps each day. You see how that works? It starts with 50 steps, not hard. By the end of the year, you're walking 10,000 steps every day. And you love it. You crave it. It has become a part of who you are because now you have something that you do at the same time every day, and all of a sudden, it's like that time of day comes and you think, I should be doing something. Oh yes, I need to be walking. And all of a sudden, you're walking at that time of day without even thinking about it, and you started way back from where you are at the end of the year. He says you want to become a better writer. The identity here is become the type of person who writes 1,000 words every day. A small win is write 1 paragraph each day this week. You want to become strong? The identity is become the type of person who never misses a workout. Small win, you do push-ups every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You start there. Atomic habits form into big systems. You want to be a better friend? The identity, become the type of person who always stays in touch. Small win, call 1 friend every Saturday. If you repeat the same people every 3 months, you'll stay close with 12 old friends throughout the year. You want to be taken seriously at work? Become the type of person who's always on time. Here's the small win. Schedule meetings with an additional 15-minute gap between them so you can go from meeting to meeting and always show up early. And so you apply this to everything we've been talking about. You want to spend more time in solitude? 1 minute. Can you find 1 minute? And you make it a place, and you make it a time, and you make it a habit. I'm going to spend 1 minute with God today. And that may sound like, wow, what a loser I am. 1 minute. No. 1 minute builds. The next day I'm going to spend 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Before you know it, by the end of the year, you're spending an hour with God every day. And you crave it, you crave it, you crave it. Because you identify, your identity is a child of God. You have a God who loves you and wants to spend time with you, and you want it, you crave it. And so James breaks it down into 4 fundamental parts that can help us understand how this habit is, how it works, and how to improve it. Here's the diagram. There's a cue, there's a craving, there's a response, and there's a reward. So think about this. The cue triggers a craving, which motivates a response, which provides a reward, which satisfies the craving and ultimately becomes associated with the cue. So every habit we have, there's a cue. Again, you probably do the same things in the morning in the same order. Every time you make your coffee, you do something right after that that you did the morning before, because making your coffee is the cue that provides the craving to do the next thing that you always do, and so on and so forth. Have you seen this in your life? Why do you come sit in the same seat every single time you come to this building? Because there's a cue. As soon as you walk through those doors right there, there's a habit in your mind that you go to the same area, the same chair, because we are habitual creatures. It's what we do. And this is our whole lives, and we don't even know it. We don't even recognize it, but we can change it. All right, so together, these 4 steps form a neurological feedback loop, is what James Clear says. He says cue, craving, response, reward, and they ultimately allow you to create new habits, new small habits. And this cycle is known as the habit loop. So we can transform these 4 steps into a practical framework that we can use to build our rule of life, that we can use to create new good habits, Christ-like habits, and even eliminate bad ones. Have you been caught up in a sin that you have found you can't eliminate? I don't know how many guys and girls I've sat with over the years who had porn addictions. a bad habit that they just come and they talk and they're like, man, Boo, I can't break this habit. And I use that example because it's probably the most prevalent in our society today. And it's this method right here is one of the key ways in which you can break a bad habit. Because they want to. I've never had a person sit in my office, I've never had a person talk to me about that problem and not want to break it. Obviously, they're not going to come to me if they don't want to break it. Now, I'm not qualified for a lot of times to help them. They need somebody with different credentials, but I can encourage them in this. And so to break a bad habit, there's usually a cue there with any bad habits that we have. Something, a trigger, right? Something that triggers that bad habit. So you identify the bad trigger and you replace it with something else. Or when that trigger happens, you form a new habit that's the cue for. Right? And so James Clear talks about this. We can use it to build good practices and get rid of the bad practices. Here's kind of how he breaks it down. How to create a good habit. The first one, cue, make it obvious. Don't make it kind of hidden. Make it obvious. You know, like I'm changing out of my work clothes, putting on my comfy clothes. That's an obvious cue. I'm going to do 10 push-ups right now. And the next day I'm going to do 15 push-ups. I don't know if I can get to 50. Maybe I can build up to 50. But, you know, that's the cue. You make it obvious. The second law is make it attractive. Third law is make it easy. Don't try and do an hour with God your very first day. It's not going to happen. 5 minutes. 1 minute. Make it easy. Make it satisfying. Like, make it something that is rewarding to you. This is my identity. This is who I want to be. How to break a bad habit, you just reverse that. You make it invisible. You put these cues out of sight, out of mind. You make it unattractive. You make it difficult to get to that point. That's a big part of sexual sin and pornography and all of that. That's a big part of helping a person break this bad habit is you prevent them. You put walls up. You make it almost impossible for them to get to that point, right? And the inversion of the fourth law is make it unsatisfying. So here's a summary cheat sheet that is in the book. I don't think you can see that, but if you buy the book, if you get the book, there's a habit scoreboard. You can kind of write down your habits to become aware of them, which I think is a great practice. You write out, here's what I do every day. Like, here's kind of the flow and the rhythm of my everyday. And then you put a plus, which is a good habit, next to, like, I wake up, that's good. Plus, I woke up. I go to the bathroom, plus. Brush my teeth, plus. You know, grab my phone, negative. You don't want that one. And then you just go down the list. What's a plus? What's a negative? How can I get rid of the negatives in there? What cue is before the negative? And how do I change that negative and make it unattractive? And James Clear talks about habit stacking. After current habit, I will new habit. Because we all have rhythms of habits. After I do this, here's my new habit. So if you have something negative in your life, you don't want it there. I know you don't. I don't either. How do I get rid of it? Will you replace it with a new habit? One that is attractive, one that is satisfying, one that helps build your new identity. And he says, you design your environment, make the cues of good habits obvious and visible. You make it attractive. You pair an action you want to do with an action you need to do, but you might not necessarily want to do. Right? If fasting for you is something you don't want to do, then pair it with something that is attractive to you, like going and walking in nature. Is that attractive to you? Then go and do it. On the days that I was fasting with the congregation, or that was the week before because y'all fasted while we were in Honduras, but I kept thinking like, man, I'm hungry. I want to eat something And so I went and walked around outside. So I paired it with something that was attractive to me to make the unattractive thing attractive. And so that's what you do. You make it easy. You don't try and conquer the whole world at first. Don't try and get to what your goal is. You work on your system, and then you make it satisfying. Give yourself an immediate reward when you complete your habit. He says, make doing nothing enjoyable when avoiding a bad habit. Design a way to see the benefits. And then he has a habit tracker. You keep track of your habit streak. Don't break the chain. If you do break the chain, you get right back into the habits that you have created. And then here's the last deal, and I'll be quiet because my time's up. How to break a bad habit. Reduce exposure. Obviously, remove the cues of your bad habits from your environment. Reframe your mindset. Highlight the benefits of avoiding your bad habits. Celebrate when you don't do something that you don't like or something that is ungodly in your life. Like, celebrate the fact that you didn't do it one time. You made it unattractive. You overcame it. You didn't give in. Whatever it is, whatever your bad habits are, celebrate your wins. Increase friction. Make it difficult. Increase the number of steps between you and your bad habits. If you eat sweets every single morning, remove those sweets from the middle of your kitchen, right? Remove them. If you have a basket of pastries and donuts in the middle of your kitchen and your fruit is hidden away, what do you think you're going to eat? Pastries and donuts. You're not going to reach for a banana or fruit. He uses an example in his book. This hospital, the director of the hospital wanted to change the eating habits of the staff and the patients. And without even talking to them, they just restructured the cafeteria. They put water bottles in more accessible places. You could still buy a Coke. They made it more difficult to get donuts and things like that. Like you still get them, but they're not as accessible. And they saw a decline, a 40% decline in soda sales in 1 year without even talking to people. They bought more water, they drank more water, they ate healthier than they were before. You just simply, you make it difficult, you make it unsatisfying. You get an accountability partner, you ask someone to watch your behavior, you create a habit contract, he says, make the cost of your bad habits public and painful. You use all of these things to help form your rule of life. I found this book extremely helpful. I want to give you one quote that I'll leave you with. He says this. He says, all big things come from small beginnings. The seed of every habit is a single tiny decision, but as that decision is repeated, a habit sprouts and grows stronger. Roots entrench themselves and branches grow. The task of breaking a bad habit is like uprooting a powerful oak within us, and the task of building a good habit is like cultivating a delicate flower, one day at a time. I want to practice Sabbath. I want to practice fasting. I want to practice generosity. I want to practice prayer. I want to practice hospitality. I want to practice all the things that we're going to talk about. But that's not going to happen just because I want to. I have to form a rule of life. I have to discipline myself to live like Christ and to live into the image that he has created me to live. Not because I want to earn salvation or anything like that, but simply because I want to be with him and I want to be more like him. Don't we want to do that as a church? If we don't, then we're wasting our time. We're just gathering together and we're building ourselves up, and then we go back out and we aren't transformed and we aren't equipped for the work of ministry. Small habits lead to big changes. I hope this was helpful to you. It was helpful to me. I'm obviously willing to chat about it if you want to chat. Go get the donuts that are sitting in the middle of the room prepared for you. We love you all. Bye.